Good evening, everyone. In case you didn't know, we are here to discuss the Generation 2030 Africa Report. And I am hoping that at the end of it, we will be talking only about one thing, and we'll be talking about the dividend that Africa is about to reap from its young, and the solutions and the ways that will take us there. And this report is painting a picture which says that by the end of the 21st century, by 2100, 41% of the world's population will be African. By 2050, the report says, Nigeria alone will account for almost 1/10 of all births in the world. That is shocking. It also says that it is projected that 1.1 billion children under 18 will be living in Africa by 2100. And the picture gets a little dark. It says Africa has the highest child dependency ratio, 73 children under the age of 15 per 100 persons of working age in 2015. That's close to double the global average. We need to think. But there's also light. By 2035, Africa as a continent will have its first generation of children that can expect to reach the pensionable age of 65 years. If we do something. Luckily for me, I'm not providing the solutions. I've got a panel of experts here with me that are going to help us provide the answers, the actions, and the policies that will be required to ensure that those Africans that will reach that pensionable age will be healthy indeed. Let me introduce my panelists. I've got Michael O'Brien Onyeka. He is the Executive Director of Greenpeace Africa. Thank you very much for joining us, sir.
Thank you.
And next to him, we've got Nyaradzayi Gumbonzvanda. I think I want to say I'm the only one who can pronounce that name. Nyaradzayi, welcome. She's General Secretary of World Young Women's Christian Association and AU Goodwill Ambassador for the Campaign to End Child Marriages. Thank you very much for joining us today. Next to here, we've got Fred Swaniker, Founder and Executive Chairman of the African Leadership Academy. Fred, thank you for your time. And the very distinctive Jay Naidoo, Chairperson of GAIN. Sir, I need not introduce you more. And next to him, David Anthony. David Anthony is the Chief of the Policy Advocacy Unit Division of Data, Research and Policy at UNICEF, and a co-author of the report that we're talking about today. David, thank you for your time. And Dr. Lyal, you have heard, he is Director of the Center for Dynamic Markets at GIBS. Thank you very much indeed for coming through. I want to start off with you, David. I think to begin, to give everyone context in terms of what you guys found out, we lay it out first, and then at the end, I want us to try and see if we can find solutions.
What we found was that basically the African population will double by 2050. That's like adding a China to Africa in 35 years. This is absolutely unprecedented in human history, that many people will join an existing population of about 1.1 billion in that space of time. Specifically going to the child population, we're going to have around about 650 million more children in the next 35 years, taking the number of under 18s in Africa to 1 billion. Again, a China of children in Africa. Africa has already the highest proportion of children as part of its total population. 40% of all Africans are under the age of 18 years old. If you take that to youth, it becomes way over 50%. So when you talk about Africa, you aren't necessarily talking about youth and children.
Right.
Yeah? The majority of Africans are young. 1 in every 3 children also is going to be African very soon by the mid-century. By 2030, 1.8 billion births will take place on this continent. That's a sobering thought. Do we have enough facilities to look after those births?
That's almost double the current population of Africans.
That's right. So with these statistics in mind, our issue was to look further. What are the forces driving the high fertility rates in Africa? And one of them very clearly is adolescent fertility. Much, much higher than the rate of the global rate of adolescent fertility in Africa. It's almost like 1 in every 10 adolescents is having a child. And I think the other forces that we are seeing driving high fertility levels in Africa are things such as fragility and conflict. It's very clear that in fragile states in Africa, fertility rates are much higher than in non-fragile states.
And Africa has more fragile states than any other part of the world.
Exactly.
Let's get initial reactions from our panelists. Can I begin with the lady? So we respect you, ma'am. From your perspective, working with young women, working around the continent, when you look at that report, what were your initial impressions?
First, I was just seeing all the pregnant women, the billions of them, and asking myself how many African women are going to die or not to die in order to give birth to this new Africa. And what I would like to see, and looking at that data, is really the issue of maternal mortality first. I mean, we really have to address that. And secondly, when I was reading the data around adolescent fertility, I'm like, this is child marriage. The moment you're talking about adolescent fertility, you're actually talking about Loveness in this room, wherever she's sitting. Where are you, Loveness? We're talking about Loveness there being married when she's 16 and having preterm kids before she's 20 years old. That's what we're talking about. And so, for me, this dividend requires some serious conversations around girls. Because the report is saying the future of Africa is young and female. It's young and female in terms of the numbers. It's young and female in terms of the responsibilities of women on the continent. The silent gender data, which is so visible but which is not articulated, I think is something that we really need to talk about, because that's the conversation of Africa. If we have to harvest that dividend, we have to say, where does the investment lie? But actually, it's also some of the invisible issues in this data. Looking at where Africa is today, HIV and AIDS, looking at women, majority of African women feeding families, licking the spoon, a spoon they do not even own. So yes, we're talking about nutrition, but they don't even own the land, they don't even... So there are a number of other bigger issues that this data is providing us with regards to where would be in generation 2030.
Absolutely.
And for me, it's an exciting conversation, definitely.
Absolutely. So a lot of other ideas that spring out of it. Let's go to Jay Naidoo. Now, Jay, I just said GAIN at the beginning. Let me spell out the organization. It's the Partnership Council of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. Jay, your initial impressions?
You know, I feel like I'm back to the past because I'm a dinosaur in this audience. And you know, one thing I recommend to you all is don't switch off your phones. Use them to go on social media, because that's the revolution that will put a fire under the butts of our leaders in this world. And that's what they need. You know, just take the reality of what you face today. You know, half the population of Africa is probably in the around the age of 19. Not too far from here, our leaders and heads of state, you know what the average age is there? Probably 70, some of them are even 90. Now, man, when I'm 90 years old, I just want to be playing with grandkids. You shouldn't be running a country. So this is the conundrum. This is the dichotomy we have. We produce another 1,000 reports of that, but we do not have the leadership that has the political will and the courage to implement what is right. So what are we doing in Africa? You know, all the statistics show it. We have a demographic dividend. We will have the youngest population of any continent. Now, that is an asset. That is our most important asset. Now, let's look at our other assets in Africa. We have probably a third of the mineral wealth that fuels the global economy. We have 60% of the remaining arable land. Yet we have a third of hunger and malnutrition in the world. We look at our forests, we're probably 15% of the world forests. Look at our oceans, look at the land surface we have. We have tremendous assets. But why are we poor? Why do we have to suffer the statistics that we keep writing reports about? It comes to an issue of governance and leadership. And I was young, living under apartheid, which has stolen our dignity. Our parents told us, don't get involved in politics because you'll get arrested, beaten up, killed, or tortured. We defied them. You know, my advice to you is, you know what the statistics are. You face it every day. You need to organize yourself and build the power that changes your reality. If we stood back and said we had nothing we could do in 1976, we would still be living under apartheid. So I'm not going to say, I have the solution, you have the solution, you know what to do, go out and do it.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you. Amongst us, you'll see there are a lot of young people, and we're going to invite them to participate in the discussion as we go along. Let me come to Fred. Fred, not only do you look youthful, I think you're the youngest here. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. So here's the conundrum, as he mentions, right? I mean, we've got the resources, we've got the land, and yet we still spend, I think the last stat that I saw is that we spend about $40 billion every year importing food into Africa. And yet the statistics show that we have got the resources here. How do you combine that with what this report is talking about in terms of harnessing and being able to use those resources going forward?
So the way I think about this issue is really that it's about harnessing the potential of the people that we have in Africa. So we go from thinking about the ballooning population from being a liability to a real asset. And that ultimately for me comes from education. Right? Unless we invest in all of these young people that are being produced, it's going to be a wasted generation. Right? So how do we think about, because we can't sit back, I completely agree with Jay, and wait for others to solve our problems for us as Africans. We've been for too long, we've been waiting for the West to come and, my mother, whenever she goes and travels to the States or whatever, she comes back and like, man, they must come and build those highways for us here. It's like, no, why don't we build it ourselves? And the only way we can do that is by, investing in our brain power. So I think that it's time for us to stop thinking about incremental changes.
Right.
What we need is a complete step change, where we need to think about radical solutions to the problem of education in Africa, such that we leapfrog the way we educate ourselves. And so that in a very quick generation, we're able to actually create people who are equipped to create their own jobs through entrepreneurship, and we're able to educate themselves and are actually able to utilize all these resources that you talk about to actually create wealth so that we can look after ourselves, pave our own roads, build our own houses, educate ourselves. Because unless we do that, we'll be begging the rest of the world for the rest of our lives.
Thank you, Fred. So you started talking about education, thinking about education and how we can use education to make sure we provide these radical solutions. We'll come back to you for those radical solutions. Michael, you're right next to me. Your contribution, you are with Greenpeace.
Yeah.
Obviously, you work a lot around issues around sustainability, and I think there can't be any bigger issue around sustainability than making sure that we are able to use our young people.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, my approach to this, when I read the report, it was a mixture of slight shock, not entirely surprising, but extreme worry and anxiety, because
Worry and anxiety.
Yeah, because this could be a great dividend. I mean, we are basically saying Africa could become the China of the future. And there is something in Confucius' philosophy called Weiji in Mandarin, which means it's a Chinese definition of crisis. It's danger, it's opportunity. It's two words, Weiji. So either we have to approach this from that concept that it's potentially a challenging demographic reality, but could equally be huge, bringing huge dividends. So what do we need to do? Like Fred said, and Jay and previous speakers, we need to basically leapfrog all facets of our lives and our development. The incremental changes that our political leaders keep peddling to us would simply not work. So if you don't need to be a rocket scientist to just figure out the future we'll face. So look at South Africa here. We have about 65 service delivery protests on average every day. We are struggling with providing good basic education, good basic medical care, good basic everything. And now we are saying within our lifetime, this is not about Einstein and us thinking about Einstein and Isaac Newton. And this is in our lifetime, we will have doubled or more than doubled population across the continent. what would that do to our increasingly scarce water resources?
Double trouble.
Double trouble, quadruple trouble. So unless our politicians realize that, and that's where the challenge lies, like Jay was highlighting, we have a political elite that is neurotic in the pursuit of power. And they are neurotic in the pursuit of power in the sense that they're not thinking it's short-termism, my term is 4 years, I have to do what I have to do, get what I can get out of that, and then move on or stay with no additional benefit bringing on to the country. So we need to say, if the future is literally in the hands of the youth, you need to take that political power. I'm not saying violently, but you need to organize yourself. You need to mobilize yourself. I passionately believe that my father's generation has failed us when it comes to sustainability. My generation is failing us. And if you, the youth, fail us, then we can all forget about it.
Yeah, we've got an activist in the house here. Definitely. And he looked at the report with worry and anxiety. But Lyal, I bet when you looked at that report, you didn't worry, you did not have anxiety. I thought, in my mind, I'm thinking you must have been excited because you were thinking all these young minds to educate.
And all these markets that will be growing across the African continent.
Absolutely.
So, Godfrey, what is fascinating about this debate, if we had this debate just 3 years ago, we would have been only talking about the demographic dividends.
Sure.
We would have been on the back of the McKinsey Lions on the Move. If you remember that report,
I
that
do.
was all about the demographic dividends.
Absolutely.
What our transaction advisory firms failed to look at was what Jay was just talking about now, some of the reality behind that data. Some of the reality, some of the data and the information behind the big data. And so I agree. And we actually had this debate earlier this afternoon with the youth.
Right.
And I asked them a very simple question. I just said, is this new demographic story a good or a bad thing along with the urbanization of Africa? And typically as the youth, they said that's the wrong question. So, and indeed they were right, it was the wrong question, because they said, well, it depends what we do with it. And I think that is fundamental, and that's what we're talking about right now, that's what we're talking about this evening, is what do we do with it? And it comes down to leadership and governance. But unfortunately, leadership and governance, especially in the context of Africa, becomes this cop-out. It becomes a kind of an amorphous thing. And I'd like us to start developing a far more structured plan and real action points for us to realize. Just one or two very, very important points around, what could become, instead of a demographic dividend, a demographic nightmare. Those of us that have traveled across the continent, when you travel to Kinshasa or to Nairobi and you go to Kibera, Kibera is the largest slum on the African continent.
Yeah.
Anywhere between 500,000 and 1 million people, because nobody really knows.
Yeah.
In an area of 16 square kilometers. Diepsloot will take over that very, very soon, I can tell you that, because if you look at the population dynamics there, those people have very little access to public services, to education, to all those things. So it comes back to the points that Fred and Jay were raising. We need to actually have structured plans. Within the next 70 years, 80 years, Tanzania is going to have a population the size of the United States.
300 million.
Do we have the resources to be the United States within the next 80 years?
Good question.
Can I suggest a reflection on history? Because there are times when we have succeeded in Africa because of political will. In the mid-90s, I was Minister of Telecommunications. We had less landlines in sub-Saharan Africa than the island of Manhattan. And we got together as ministers and said, we are last in the line of our governments getting money from them to build telecoms, because the priorities were clinics and schools and houses and everything else. But there was a development globally of private sector investing in mobile telephony. And so when we got together, we recognized what we're going to do is have a strategy, have a policy framework. If we could guarantee certainty of policy, law, and regulations, and harmonize the spectrum, you could create a market that someone else would pay for other than government.
Right.
And then you could use policy to influence these companies to deliver our commitment to universal service. They complain bitterly when I ask them to go to rural areas in this country. They say, how do you expect us to make money?
Yeah.
Poor people do not spend money on telecoms. He said, this is the basis of your license. Fast forward, we're the fastest growing telecom market in the world.
True.
1 billion people. What was the game changer? The game changer was actually forcing them to change their business model by saying, and they innovated, like the private sector does, and they created a prepaid card. So what changed the landscape was a prepaid card. If you look at environment and energy today, look at the ridiculous policy options we're proposing in South Africa.
Yeah.
Of going down an old technology like fracking,
Yeah.
when we have 360 days of sunlight in Africa.
So it goes back to what you were saying.
Going
It's
back,
about leadership.
It's about leadership, but making the right decisions, not influenced by short-termism
Yeah.
or influenced by vested interest.
Yeah.
We chose GSM even though people were trying to sell us NLO. We made a definitive choice. We ask our leaders today, do you have the commitment to the long-term future of our continent
Yeah.
to make the right choices about the assets we have that places a path of hope and opportunity for the young people?
Yeah. Part of the problem is, of course, that short-termism and politicians live together. It's very hard to separate those two. They don't think in terms of legacy, they think in terms of how do I get back next year. But we'll come to that. I want to come back to you, David, because, as I said, we want to talk about how we ensure that we get that dividend at the end of our conversation. What are some of the recommendations that you guys come up with in the report? What ought to be done, and by whom?
I think a lot of what's been said by my colleagues around here
Yeah.
is very much reflective of the report. I mean, what Jay just said now about long-termism, about seizing the opportunity, about looking into the future, about taking leadership in Africa. That's really the thesis of our policy agenda. Investing in children, investing in youth.
Education.
Education is part of it, but it's not the whole thing. Health is part of it, but it's not the whole thing. Employment is part of it, but it's not the whole thing. It includes things such as sustainable energy and using those sun hours, Jay just mentioned, to really have a sustainable model of energy. Africans need energy to develop. Africa has more sun hours, and many people are not in this old traditional fossil fuel-based model.
Yeah.
You can take them, as Jay said, straight into renewables.
Can I ask you a difficult question? Is it about providing economic solutions to these social ills? Is that what it is about? Because that's what the minister did.
It's about basically doing a number of things together. There's the economic part of it. There's the social empowerment of it, an empowerment of women part of it. That is absolutely critical. If we are going to manage the demographic transition, women have to be empowered. The issue of trying to end child marriage is critical. Allowing those girls to go to school. We know very clearly that when you empower and educate women, they make the choices that will lead us towards that path.
Yeah. The interesting part is, so one story, I was working on a story, I think it was at the beginning of the year, and we're talking about education. What we found was that countries with the lowest or the poorest education systems also had some of the highest births that we're talking about here. For instance, Niger is one prime example. So how do you, where do you begin?
There's no magic bullet, and I think we have to be very clear about this. There is not one solution. There's not infrastructure development or anything that will help us there. Partly, as Jay mentioned at the beginning, it is really getting the will of the young people to want that change. Change comes when people demand the change.
I want you guys to think about how we get children in Niger to want to go to school so that they don't have the highest birth rate in Africa, 7.5. Huh? Incredible. But go on.
Yeah, and I think also it's about, as Jay also said, and others, right, it's about leadership. It's about leadership through the political system, but it's about leadership outside the political system. It's about people taking those decisions and to really push through, to push for Africa. And a sense of Africa as having this future of non-dependence on the West, of determining its own future, of being opportunity and prosperity and safety for its people.
Okay.
And I think that is the ethos behind the policies that must drive them going forward.
I wanted to jump in here and say, I work with young people every day in the YWCA. I'm a chief executive of a global organization with young people every day. I think our governments have to play catch up. Young people are way advanced. They are innovating every day. They are creating value every day, but they are not enabled.
But Nyaradzayi, we know that. How do we make those governments do that?
One of the solutions definitely is our governments might realize it's so late, because as we are already seeing in so many ways, young people are continuing to find ways in which to push their agenda, and the politicians have to play catch up.
Right.
Look at the streets of Harare, just to go home a little bit. When you look at who are the people who are vending in the street and running the informal economy, it's mostly young people and women. And then it means the public policy and the public actor actually has to play catch up in order to resolve the issue. So what I'm saying essentially is the crisis of the moment definitely is a governance crisis.
Yeah.
But I also had one other small point.
Yeah.
I was born in a village in Zimbabwe and I live in Switzerland. We need to think about 2030 from an African young person being a global citizen,
Right.
and not only from the notion of being Afrocentric as if the world will always be confined, because thought, knowledge, technology, capital is so transacted every day across boundaries. But at times when you talk about young people, when you talk about the future, it's as if we would just be confined here. So I'm looking at Generation 2030 in a way that Africa and its young people is part of harvesting the global, that youth dividend has to be part of a globalized conversation, other than a very narrow Afrocentric conversation.
Fred, I want to go to Fred and then come to Michael. But Fred, where do we light the fire?
Where do we light the fire?
Yes.
Under our leaders' feet. The nice thing about the situation that we have is that the population is so young that if youth mobilize and actually create a youth party, you can win an election. You can actually create, 60-70% of the population, of the electorate is below the age of 30 in most countries. So at the end of the day, we as the youth should stop complaining and actually take action. Unless we create our own youth parties and get ourselves into power.
Is Julius in the house?
We are going to be, because
We need more, right?
No, but you said the youth.
the youth, exactly. Because the issue of leadership is the single most important thing that's going to drive change in the short run, right? And it actually doesn't take that much time. All you have to do is go to Rwanda to see what I'm talking about. Now, Paul Kagame has many, he's not a perfect leader, right? Let's say that.
Sure.
But there are things that he has done in 20 years. If you're looking at what has happened when they were, where they were 20 years ago after the genocide, it's far worse than almost any country in Africa is today, right? Yet the strides they've made in 20 years in terms of improvements in child mortality and health and statistics and education, and all these things, infrastructure. I mean, the economy is, and they are, if they continue where they're going, in another 20, 30 years, they'll be out of, it'll be a really prime example of what's happening.
Really,
but it's all about leadership. So unless we take political power, and actually, because we don't have strong institutions in Africa, and so just one or two leaders can actually make or break a country. And that's where it starts.
Indeed. You want to come in?
I was reflecting when some of my colleagues here were talking. To think the natural response from most of our leaders who know we don't have any money to implement the required changes. And you hear that a lot, and it really becomes irritating, because if you go to a place like Burkina Faso, when we meet some of these government officials, I always ask them, but you always have money for security. You never have money for education and health improvement. I mean, it's the premium we place on the importance of things that matter. That's the key question. And I think that's why we need strong, active citizenry across the continent. And I can't overemphasize that. And I'm not saying climb buildings like Greenpeace does, but, become politically aware, stop leaving that in the hands of the political elite, and begin to take on, charge of your future. It is your future that people are messing around with. So when we say in South Africa we want to build 3 new mega coal plants, when there are clear, viable, non-expensive alternatives, and when those coal plants will jeopardize your water security, you need to stand up and say, not in my name. And so what I'm saying is that we need to begin to add pressure to our political class to begin to do the required investments, the urgent investments that are needed right now in education, in health, in even if it means throwing out of the window the entire education model, the curriculum, because we need to build entrepreneurs, not people who graduate from school hoping to get employment in a government agency. It's not going to work.